On April 27, 1989, Joy and Steve Paxton of Manassas, Virginia, were spending a quiet evening at home, expecting the return of their 16-year-old son, Chris, at any time. Joy's diary chronicles the events that began that night.
Thursday, April 27, 1989, diary on Chris's accident. 9:45 p.m.
Hello?
Chris, the phone rang.
Thank you.
A man asked for Dad. By the time he hung up, I knew something was very wrong. I thought it was his brother or his dad, anybody but you.
Yes. It hit me hard, and what I had to do is turn to Joy and tell her that Chris was in a serious accident and looked like he was critically injured. And I did tell her that it must be bad because they were medevacing him.
You've been in an accident?
When he told me you'd been in a serious accident and we had to get to the hospital, I just fell to pieces. Dad and I made it to the hospital in 45 minutes. He drove 85 miles an hour on Route 66. We didn't know if you were alive or if Ethan was okay. It was one of the worst 45 minutes of my life. God, please let you live. We love you so much. I guess I need to back up and tell you what happened. According to Ethan, Dave was driving on Hoadley Road. Some guys came by and pictured the bird.
You know, they were like yelling at us, we were like yelling at them. It wasn't anything, you know, big violent thing. We were starting to have a good time, you know, starting to get dark, thinking something might happen with this evening.
I'm not what you call a fast driver. I wasn't used to the speed I was traveling. Just a burst of recklessness.
He went around a corner 60 miles an hour and hit a tree on the back right side.
It seemed like he flipped about 20 times. I just sat up and seen that Chris wasn't in the car and seen that Steve was in the car. Dave's car door was open already, so we just, you know, got out through there. His seat was broken, so I was able to push the seat up and just get out. Got up and found Steve right away. He was laying about 20 feet away from the car. He was out cold.
We find him, and he's bleeding, but he's breathing all right.
Looked around and couldn't find Chris at first. Finally, we found him up in the ditch, like towards where the crash had started, and he looked pretty messed up.
His breathing patterns were really bad, and it was just a very unsteady flow of air out of his mouth, and that's when we knew it might be more serious for him.
One of the boys wanted to move you. Ethan said no.
Volunteer EMT Carl Johnson heard the call come over the radio.
I was on Hoadley Road as the accident got dispatched. By the time they got the call completed, I was already there on the scene.
He was off duty, but he stopped and said, "Man, I'm an EMT," and he looked over me and Dave, because we were the conscious ones, and we showed him Chris and Steve, and then he went over to them and checked out Steve for a little bit, and, you know, saw that he wasn't that bad.
This boy was semi-conscious, and he was bleeding. I tried to get him to lay still and checked his pulse, and he was breathing, and I ran over to Chris. He was lying face down about 2 feet into the ditch in amongst some weeds and brush. It was gurgling sounds as he was breathing. I felt the back of his neck. You know, you feel the back of your neck, and it's nice and smooth and hard. His was very mushy. So I didn't want to move him because I didn't want to take a chance of worsening any back or neck injuries he had. And I could hear the ambulance coming in the background of the siren.
Within 6 minutes, paramedics from the local volunteer fire department were also on the scene.
When the first ambulance did arrive at the scene, they immediately stated on the radio that they had a very bad trauma call and were going to need a helicopter.
In charge of the medical rescue effort that night was volunteer paramedic and nurse Kathy Irely.
When I got to the scene, I was directed to go to one patient, and I looked down, and there was about a 16-year-old boy, and his head was sort of construed funny. And it looked like at that time that possibly his neck was broken. And you could tell by listening to his lung sounds that he was going to have airway problems, because you could hear fluid in his lungs, which usually means he's bleeding into his lungs. So we suctioned his airway continuously.
We can roll him back.
We put some oxygen on him as best we could without moving him, and then we put the collar on, put him on the backboard.
On the board before you do that.
We knew he was critical. If we didn't act fast, he could die right there in front of us. After we got him on the backboard, I moved him into the ambulance so I could see. He didn't have any response to pain or to verbal stimulus, but he was doing what we call posturing, which means he was like pulling his arms up, which always is a sign of brain damage. In this condition, there's a good possibility the patient won't ever be a viable person in society again.
Okay, I'm going to start a line on him.
Most all the cases that haven't worn their seatbelts always have head injuries.
Both lungs now.
Get the tape. Well, it looks that way to me.
His pupils are dilated and fixed.
Has the helicopter landed yet?
At this point, I was told the helicopter had landed, and as we brought him out, the flight nurse and the paramedic met us. Somebody asked me once if I had to rate Chris critical from 1 to 5, how would I have rated him when I loaded him into a helicopter? And I said, is 5 dead? And they said, yeah. I said, I'd say he's about 4.5.
When we continue.
This is 911. Do you have an emergency?
16-year-old Chris Paxton had been critically injured when he was thrown out the back window of a speeding car. His mother, Joy, kept a diary to help her get through the hours and days that followed.
When we got to the hospital, they sent us to the shock trauma unit. Dad and I were so scared.
The doctor came out and told us that he was critically hurt, that he's got a serious head injury and he's damaged his shoulder severely, that it was more or less a 10% chance to live.
The last thing the doctor said before I got up to leave, he said, I have to get back now. He said, I'd like to sit here and talk to you. He says, but we really need to get back in there and save your son's life. So he took my hand and squeezed it before he left.
When he was brought in, we found that he was already intubated by our helicopter crew because he could not sustain breathing anymore.
Dr. Bikram Paul was the attending trauma surgeon on duty that night at Washington Hospital Center.
We wanted everything full force, full-blown. What the rescue squad has done with the rescue, we want to carry forward in the hospital. After quick examination evaluations, before even doing any chest X-ray, we knew that his lungs are not getting air because they have collapsed.
This time, his blood pressure. Okay. Yeah. A lot of pressure is over on the left side. I think he's got some rib fracture.
We put the chest tubes in, expanded the lungs, and put him on the respirator. We also immediately took him to the CT scan of the head, which showed bleeding in the brain, bleeding on the surface of the brain, and swelling of the brain. This is a serious injury. And for that reason, the neurosurgeons immediately introduced a monitor into the brain. And that monitor gave us immediately what is the pressure inside the brain. Depending on that, we give different types of treatment to lower the brain pressure.
Then they wheeled you out to go up to the intensive care unit. I got to see you for the first time then. And that was the hardest part. When they brought him out, he was laying on the stretcher. He was hooked to all these wires. They'd shaved the top of his head. He had beautiful blonde hair. And this long metal tube was coming out of the top of his brain. And there were wires everywhere. And when they wheeled him out, he was feet first. And I reached for his hand. And when I grabbed his hand, he squeezed it. And I said, look, I said, he's not going to die. He knows I'm here. He's holding my hand.
Chris was transferred to ICU, deep in a coma.
3 a.m. We just saw you again. You look so helpless. I know you're getting the best possible care. Dad is going to the lounge to sleep. I will try.
My greatest fear was losing someone that's close to me, because I've already lost somebody a couple of times in my life, and it makes it difficult. And I never like to go through that again.
11 a.m. There is no change. We can only see you a very few minutes every few hours. 5:30 p.m. You are still in critical condition. I'm so tired. Dad is going to stay tonight. I need to go home to get some sleep. 1 hour is not enough. 11 p.m. I'm going to bed. I am lying here crying. I need to let this out. I feel I should hold it for Dad and you, but when I get to my room all alone, things catch up. I need to cry. 11 a.m. I'm back to see you. You have no spinal injury. They took the collar off. God, what great news. 9 p.m. Dad and I are going home. The nurse said it will be safe for us to both go home. I have to stop and get groceries. Chris Michelle's mother brought a huge ham, baked beans, deviled eggs, a cake, and plates. What a sweet thing to do. I will send her a thank you card. She can't say enough good things about you. Tuesday, 2:30, May 2nd, 1989. They took your head pin out this morning. They are no longer concerned about your brain swelling. God, Chris, you just have to get better. I look at your picture and all your things. Escape magazine came in yesterday. Oh, I wish you could read it. It's so hard to sit here and not cry.
They have to really have a lot of patience and to put up with us. And it will not happen like next day he's going to wake up and just jump around, hi mom. He's not going to do that. Day by day, slowly going to show the improvement.
May 4th, 1 p.m., Thursday. Well, it's been a week now. You are so much better than you were 6 days ago. I have to look at the big picture. If I go day to day, things don't seem so good. Progress is so slow. I just went down to get lunch. Not real good. I've lost 6 pounds, lost my appetite. It's 4 p.m. now, Chris. A doctor finally gave me some good news. The spot on your brain has caused very little damage. Dad came by and said you opened your right eye 1/8 of an inch. He was crying when he came out of there.
I know every time I went to the hospital and saw him, it's all I could do to go in the room. It's just something that's hard for me to cope with. I just to see people in pain is a terrible thing.
My husband and I have a very good marriage. There were days when I was irritable. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to be at the hospital. I neglected the children at home, and he stepped in and he took over. I mean, he was kind of mom and dad to them while I was total everything to Chris at the hospital when I was there. And we had our ups and downs, and we'd argue and we'd fight, but there was always the hugs at the end of it, and everything was always fine. And if anything, our marriage is stronger now because of it. May 14th, Sunday. It's Mother's Day. You were really light in your coma. The nurse said you opened your eyes and turned them toward her. Then for us, you were so active. You kept moving your left leg and making the cutest facial moves. When a doctor came in, he said you were coming out of the coma. All your signs point to you coming out. I know you could hear us. He was in the coma for around 40 days. He started coming out of it after about 32 days. We'd show him pictures of the family, and he would kind of open his eyes and look like, I know who those people are.
There were times that he did want to give up. He told me a couple times he didn't want to live anymore.
I was an honored kid when I was in the hospital too. I loved to swing. I was quite mean. I mean, I was mad at the world. This wasn't fair that this happened to me. So I was going to get even. I didn't know how, but I was just going to get even. I was going to hurt everybody I could.
You have to tell him that it can't get any worse. It's got to get better. And we'd take things one step at a time. We'd work things out. And we told him he would come through this and the family would come through it. We just have to work on it.
They say I'll come back, I believe, 98%. And that's good enough for me. And the little 2%, what could that possibly be? I mean, hey.
Chris, it's been a year now. It's April 1990. We are finally back to the present. You went back to school. I actually cried when I heard you were going back to school. It's been such a long year. You must be a very special person. Most hand-injured people take up to 5 years to do what you've done in less than 1. You have the guts and strength to try harder when all else seems useless. You have gone farther than most people would have ever gone. You have never given up. Because of this, you have beaten this injury. I love you very much, Chris. This is the final chapter in this diary. I feel you're ready to go the next step. You won't need me as much anymore. I will step aside and watch you make mistakes, but I know that after what you have been through, you will come out of this with man. I'm very proud of you. Love, your mom.
Next,